Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video. Before we begin, not only do I have a new video up on my second channel today, X2, but tonight I'll also be live streaming some Empire at War. I'm not sure whether I'll be playing the new Clone Wars mod, Fall of the Republic, or perhaps something else. But as always, there will be a link up on screen and also down in the comments if you want to check it out. Streaming will probably start at about 8 PM Eastern Time. Anyway, today we'll be talking about the various eras of Dreadnoughts and Super Star Destroyers within the Star Wars Legends timeline. Unfortunately, canon hasn't provided us with a ton of details in this regard. It would basically be an Imperial era and a First Order era. So today we'll be sticking for Legends, and the first era of Super Star Destroyers is actually defined by the lack of any such ship, and I call that the pre-Dreadnought era. We don't know much, admittedly, about the navies of the very early factions of the Star Wars galaxy, but given the engineering feats we saw of the Rakata and the Celestials, it's very possible that one of those two races, or perhaps another contemporary race, did have some sort of Dreadnought, or maybe something even far larger. Certainly very large space stations like the Starforge and Centerpoint Station can be found from this time, but there are actually no records of Super Star Destroyers. Zim the Despot was known for having very large ships, but there's really no evidence that those were large ships compared to a modern SSD, and they were probably just large for the time. And if you're wondering what I mean by that, although people claim that technology in the Star Wars universe is stagnant, I've done a video chronicling the timeline of the most powerful ship in the galaxy, and if you watch that, I think you'll really see how much things have changed, certainly over periods of 10,000 years or more. There were ships which had the Dreadnought name, including the Star of Coruscant, which was a Republic Dreadnought, and the Invincible class Dreadnought heavy cruiser, and although we don't know anything about the former, it's very likely again that these ships were simply large for their time period. And although that's arguably worth talking about, I'm not going to go over every year and look at the most powerful ship of each century or millennia. Instead, I'll normalize the meaning of Dreadnought by a Super Star Destroyer, and specifically also the Anaxi's War College system, which calls a Dreadnought anything over 5,000 meters long. The first proper Dreadnoughts would actually emerge fairly late in Star Wars history, in the few decades before the Clone Wars, and this is actually pretty ironic because this was one of the most regulated times for shipbuilding in the Star Wars galaxy because of the Ruusan Reformation, which limited the size and power of warships, especially those with hyperdrive capabilities. However, Kuat drive yards had risen to prominence and had created a series of super powerful ships without hyperdrives to bypass the Ruusan Reformations, which they basically showed off around the planet of Kuat as a way to get other systems interested in purchasing vanity ships from them. For example, Kuat would try to sell a large warship to, say, Al-Sakan, not only as a practical defensive matter, but mostly as a way to show off a planet's wealth. Then of course Anaxes wouldn't want to be left behind, for example, so then they'd buy their own. Still, although these were largely showpieces and lacked hyperdrive, these massive ships were still extremely deadly. 7 KDY Dreadnoughts existed by the start of the Clone Wars, and these weren't necessarily the Mandator line, which was most famous during this time, but may have been of specialized design. It's also possible that other independent shipyards or sector forces could have produced their own large vessels. We also know of battle cruisers becoming more prominent at this time, including, for example, the Praetor. With the start of the Clone Wars, the Ruusan Reformations were largely forgotten, and KDY created the new Mandator II, selling at least 3 of these ships to the Galactic Republic. Additionally, we have the Subjugator. Although the Subjugator is just a little too short to technically be classified under the Anaxes system as a Dreadnought, the system was meant with some degree of flexibility in mind. In other words, even though the ship was too short because it was so powerful, the Subjugator could arguably be considered a Dreadnought in its own right. However, with the fall of the Republic, we get the golden age of Super Star Destroyers and Dreadnoughts. I've been able to, conservatively and looking at only confirmed ships, been able to account for at least 50 Imperial Super Star Destroyers. The Executor line came first, with a prototype ship which was 12 kilometers long and several other vessels at the full 19 kilometer length. The first fully produced ship was the Executor and was bestowed to Darth Vader, while other ships were distributed across the galaxy to those loyal to the Emperor. Many within the Imperial Navy actually had serious issues with this. They saw Super Star Destroyers largely as vanity projects and not entirely practical. However, that inefficiency of course was nothing compared to the two Death Stars. The early Executor line was supplemented by secondary SSD models, notably the Vengeance, Mandator 3, Assertor, and Bellator. All of these ships seemed to basically take elements from the Executor and exaggerate it to some degree. For example, the Bellator was much smaller, but the engine component of that ship was more prominent, and its lesser size allowed it to be much more versatile. Still, the galaxy would never see Super Star Destroyer production of this scale ever again, and to be honest, it would never even become close. Dozens of ships were made during this time, being pumped out at shipyards across the galaxy, including Fondor, KDY, Corellia, Biss, and surely other locations. With the end of the Empire's golden age and the massive confusion and chaos in the galaxy, Super Star Destroyers became tokens of power and authority. Several Imperial warlords, including Zinj, Kane, and others, largely tied their power to these Super Star Destroyers, but both the Empire and the New Republic lacked the resources to make any ships of their own. Things would be relatively stagnant until the Reborn Empire. Palpatine intended the Reborn Empire to be a boon for super large ships, akin to the difference between the Republic era and the Imperial one. To illustrate this, for the first time, a Super Star Destroyer class, the Sovereign, was actually intended as the next generation of Star Destroyer. Although the Sovereign line never actually saw completion, the Empire did use two brand new, super powerful Dreadnoughts as his flagships, the Eclipse 1 and 2, and battle cruisers like the Allegiance, which itself was sometimes referred to as a Super Star Destroyer, also stood in where regular ISDs would have otherwise. Palpatine intended a massive blitz across the galaxy, and used not only traditional Super Star Destroyers, but also very large ships like World Devastators. He was, of course, unsuccessful, and his plans never saw fruition, but he contributed to the next eras in a completely different way, mostly through decline. The Empire under Palpatine not only lost the two Eclipses and failed to construct the Sovereigns, but also wasted perhaps 20 or more Super Star Destroyers, including a dozen in the opening stages of Operation Shadow Hand. This takes us to our next era, which I've called Relics, and this saw the various factions in the galaxy still fighting fairly intensely over remaining Super Star Destroyers. The New Republic had already managed to snatch up the Lusankya and the Guardian, but remaining ships became the centerpieces of major actions against the New Republic. A good example of this would be the rediscovery of the Dominion in the Megador and the Empire's failed Arinda campaign. The Black Fleet crisis also saw a relatively obscure faction, the Yavathans, able to make use of thought to be lost Imperial Super Star Destroyers, which allowed them to threaten the galaxy. There was a slight resurgence in large ships as the New Republic not only commissioned captured Super Star Destroyers, but also began to produce their own, specifically the Viscount line. There was major controversy here because the Viscounts were actually produced after the end of the formal war with the Empire. However, the Viscounts were employed against the Yuuzhan Vong, who had their own Dreadnought analogs. Massive ships grown in their home galaxy, which too were relics, having survived a 1,000-year journey through the galactic void. With the destruction of the Yuuzhan Vong, we get a period of further decline. Although the Galactic Alliance did introduce new large ship types like the Galactic Heavy Carrier and the Mon Calamari Heavy Carrier, no new Dreadnought designs were used, and the Galactic Alliance continued to rely largely on captured vessels like the Megador or prior constructed vessels like the remaining Viscounts. And by the late Legacy era, Super Star Destroyers were abandoned totally, and the most powerful vessels in the galaxy would be considered at largest battle cruisers. Naval combat of this time was focused largely on specialization and efficiency, and there was just no room in those categories for Dreadnoughts and Super Dreadnoughts like we had seen previously. But that's all I have for today's video. I hope you guys have been enjoying this era series. I've enjoyed making it because it's sort of a fun way to synthesize all the knowledge I have about various subjects. So if you want to see more, make sure to leave your suggestion for future topics down below, and also leave a like. Just a reminder that I will be streaming some Empire at War, probably about half an hour or an hour after this video goes live. Links to that down in the comments. Anyway guys, this has been EckhartsLadder. Have a great one, and may the Force be with you.